Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about Dario Argento's 1982 giallo film Tenebrae. And the film's opening premise is simple enough, and honestly it's quite like that of Castle, a film TV series which I discussed recently. Successful mystery author Peter Neal flies from the US to Rome, where he's informed by police that a young woman has been murdered and that her body was found with pages from Neal's latest book stuffed into her mouth. So, much like Castle, crime seems to be associated with our author. In fact, Peter Neal himself was only eliminated as a suspect for this murder because he was on a plane when the killing occurred. More murders take place, progressively seeming to become more and more personal to Peter Neal as they go on. Who is committing these murders and why? It's a question that the author is understandably just as keen as the police to answer, especially since, in addition to all this violence, Neal has also been catching glimpses of his embittered former fiancée around Rome. As far as he knows, she should be half a world away back in the US. Is her appearance related to the murders or merely a coincidence? So to Italian audiences, giallo is a term for any thriller or suspense film. In English-speaking markets, however, number one, we probably butcher the pronunciation of giallo, but number two, the term is more narrowly applied to a breed of Italian thrillers, principally from the 70s and 80s, which feature gruesome murders, stylish camera work, and striking, often discordant music. And Dario Argento looms large within this body of work. His career as a writer and director encompasses over 40 stylish, albeit not always terribly coherent, films over a period of some 50 years. It is true that critical reception to Argento's movies has declined sharply since the mid-90s, but there's no doubt that the peak of both giallo films in general and Argento's career in particular runs from the mid-70s to the mid-80s. Tenebrae was a moderate success in Italy, but initially was very poorly received in the English-speaking world. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But since that initial appraisal, it has been reappraised and is now widely considered one of Argento's best works and one of the best works of giallo cinema. And this is an assessment I agree with, so let's dig into the film a little more to understand it. So the late 70s and early 80s saw the release and success of several graphically violent films, often also featuring strong sexual elements, and there was an almost inevitable moral backlash against this. This backlash was perhaps at its most prominent in the United Kingdom, which established a list of so-called video nasties that were banned from home video distribution. Now, to be honest, many of the films that ended up on the video nasties list were cheaply made, purely exploitative films designed entirely to shock and titillate. Unfortunately, despite having been passed for cinema showings almost uncut, Tenebrae somehow ended up on the Category 1 banned list and was banned on home media in the UK until 1999. Meanwhile, in the US, the film's theatrical distribution was delayed for 2 years, and when it finally did come out in 1984 under the title Unsane, it was in a heavily censored, nearly incomprehensible form that ran a full 10 minutes shorter than the original movie. This version deservedly received near unanimously negative reviews, but it's unfortunately still floating around on cheap DVD sets, so if you do go looking for this movie, make sure you get the full 110-minute version. You'll be doing yourself and the film a disservice if you struggle through one of the drastically shorter cuts. But all of this meant, as I said earlier, the film was initially very poorly received, but over time, that assessment has been reappraised. Now, it's a much less celebrated fact about giallo films, but in addition to imaginative cinematography and interesting soundtracks, one of their most common features was incoherent stories. As a rule, these films were far more interested in creating stylish, shocking, memorable moments of cinema than telling coherent end-to-end narratives. Unlike a lot of these films, however, including for that matter several of his own offerings, Tenebrae does in fact have a coherent end-to-end story, so well done to Argento for that. Now, it's important to be clear that coherent does not mean straightforward, nor, frankly, does it even particularly mean plausible. As far as the former term is concerned, the mystery here is not at all straightforward, and the film's answers to it are rarely simple ones. They're also squarely from the cinematic version of Criminal Investigations. There's a whole host of secrets, obsessions, and revelations to uncover. Twists and turns are here aplenty. So yeah, like I said, it's not plausible, It's contrived, but it's coherent. All in all, the twists and turns hang together properly when they're relieved. This is one of those movies where things that initially seem a bit off when they happen end up making more sense once the truth is revealed. And that's a really nice change from films which throw in a twist for the sake of surprising the audience and end up having earlier events retroactively become incoherent and nonsensical. And I can see why Tenebrae is regarded as one of the strongest Argento movies from a narrative perspective. Now, I definitely think that the United Kingdom's banning of Tenebrae was an overreaction and that the film had no business being on a video nasties list. This is a film made with skill and care. It's not a cheap and brutal brutish cash grab that's grasping for the lowest common denominator. But I do need to caution anyone thinking of watching Tenebrae that it is a confronting film at times. The movie is packed with gruesome and gory murders, with a killing on average happening every 10 minutes, and some of the murder scenes are very violent. Ironically, though, despite the stabbings, garrottings, dismemberments, and other forms of homicide, the scariest and most intense scene to my mind is one where a young woman is chased by a vicious Doberman dog. While in the murder scenes, I found I could be detached enough to appreciate the skill of the cinematography and staging, this chase scene drove straight into that primitive fight or flight instinct in your brain and triggered all of those flight impulses in a big way. I was really on edge, even though I knew, obviously, this is all staged. It's a really well done scene, but for me also a genuinely kind of tense and frightening one. Tenebrae also has a fair bit of nudity, some of which felt rather gratuitous to me, and there's definitely a strong psychosexual element to the murders, both in terms of their in-character motivations and the way they are depicted on screens. I don't feel that the movie is endorsing those motivations or actively eroticizing the violence, and I would have negative things to say about the movie if it did, but the content will absolutely not be to all taste, so take that into account when you're considering whether to see this film. It's a sometimes confronting movie and it won't be to everyone's taste. But I think what it does very well. And if you're into dark and violent thrillers with lots of twists and turns and you don't mind some intense content, it's definitely worth seeking out. Next time, from a good film about a fictional serial killer to a bad miniseries about a real one. It's the pompous poppycock that is 1988's Jack the Ripper. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.